All right, so let's get started with our next seminar. This is going to be presented by Dave Morton. He's going to be showing how he built his last GSL Best of Show winning model. This hour is brought to us by Paul Agnostopoulos.
Pretty good.
Was that close?
That's very close.
I can't. Okay.
No, unpronounceable.
It's really not like hippopotamus.
I spent the last hour trying to figure out
Snuff.
Anyway. Okay.
It's Paul unpronounceable.
There you go.
Anyway, thanks, Paul.
Yes.
We'll just go with that. A couple other housekeeping items. If you have not had a chance to, after you've registered, meet with Lynn Coberna and get your extra stuff digitized for us. We're trying a new thing this year to kind of compile some of the information, have it digitally available. Please see Lynn before, preferably in the next little while, to get that information uploaded. Okay, so without further ado, take it away, Dave.
Cool, thanks, Ed. One thing before we get started, how many people here have entered models today or yesterday? How many of you have seen Lynn, the guy just inside the contest hall, and talk to him about your models? Great, about half. If you guys, when we're done, could go talk to him, he doesn't need your model, he only needs you, and to talk a little bit about what you've brought, all of your entries. He's making
Digital database.
digital database. And so those that haven't been, he'd like to see you. It's all the way, when you go to the contest hall, it's that far wall, just on this side of registration.
He needs the blue form. You need the blue form.
He needs your blue form for your models, and it'll only take about 3 to 5 minutes for you to talk about all your entries. And then I guess he's getting the pictures from.
Is the volume okay in the back? No?
I'm not on? Okay, sorry.
There you go.
So if you didn't hear me, if you can see Lynn, if you have a model that you've entered, and just see him so that he can record the data. I'm having a problem with the video that I brought to show, so I'll just talk a little bit about it. It's playing here. If you have questions afterwards, I can answer them. If you were here 2 years ago, it's the same video that was underneath the model as you looked at it. How it started, I saw the truck online. I thought it was very unique and very interesting. I found out some people in Canada had made it, so I called them. And before I called them, I wrote down questions that I would need to know in order to build it in scale, so that I was not tying up the phone line. And I didn't get sidetracked while I was talking to them. So I encourage you, if you're building something and it really exists and you're talking to the people, write down some of the stuff you think you'll need, wheelbase, length of different things, sizes and stuff. And so when I called Frank at Quality Customs in Canada, he was kind of shocked I was building a model of it. And then he was very helpful in sending, or in giving me all the answers to my questions. And then he sent me electronically pictures of their build. So from the early stages, how it got started and what they did. And that was most helpful as well. And so if you have a subject matter that you want to do, and the owner of that subject matter is willing to give you that information, that's very helpful when it goes to making the parts. It took me about 1,500 hours to make it. Mostly brass. This is my first time working with stainless, which is a wonderful medium, but when you make a mistake, you're done, and there's no way to fix it. And so it's a good thing to use because it's shiny, and you don't have to coat it or plate it or do anything like that with it. But it is unforgiving, and I have 8 sets of running boards that were folded wrong. I folded them wrong. And the 9th set, I got correct. And so when you look at this model, you don't see the boxes of parts that didn't make it. And so I want to encourage those when they see a quality build like Chris Nichols backdraft and Mark's 15th 7. There's a lot of parts you don't see that didn't make the cut. And that was probably the most difficult portion of the build because there's 2 lines on the running boards that are parallel, and then the next 2 lines are parallel on another plane. So if you're a 1/16 of an inch off on your fold, you've ruined it. Won't fit. And so that was a challenge. Without my video, I don't know what all to tell you other than the mediums that I use would be brass, a lot of brass, the whole frame and suspension steering and everything is out of brass. It's easy to work with, it's easy to solder, and when it comes time to painting brass, I put it in my bead blast cabinet on a very low PSI to create a microscopic grainy effect to the brass. That's going to allow my primer to bite down. I decant these self-etching primers. I don't know if that acid really works on brass, but it appears to work really well, and it keeps it from chipping, and it gives it good adherence. So I decant the self-etching automotive primer. I thin it out with lacquer thinner, and then I shoot that on all the brass parts, and then shoot I'll shoot a white primer if it's a light color, and then the top coat, the yellow. The other stuff that doesn't look like stainless but is close is mainly machined. A lot of the rims, the front rims took me 6 hours, and the rear a piece, and the rear rims were 3 hours a piece. And I messed up front. I was 2.5 hours into it. I didn't do the math as well as Greg did. Came down and cut my hole and went, oh, there's 2.5 hours down the drain. So I had to start back over. And that's always frustrating. You probably don't have that problem because you have very good notes. And then the wheels in the back. This truck was singled out from the people that made it, and the reason they called it that was because it has singles in the back. And so I cast the front wheel, put it on my lathe, came in and cut it so I could split it, and then made a cookie so I could widen that wheel and clean that up as a slick first and cast that. So now I have a slick, fat rear tire. Then I cast more front tires, put those on my lathe. Like Greg was saying, you can use your lathe for a lot of things. And I would cut one tread. If there's like 6 little rows, I'd cut one of those off, and it's now a ring. And I can slide that onto my slick, create my tread pattern, bondo the edges, and then cast that. So the rear wheels were made by basically cookies together, and then sliding the tread rings over. On one of them, you're going to remove the outside diameter. On the other, the ring, you're going to remove the inside diameter, so they slide over. And then you cast that entire tire. And then that way you can make tires as big as you want. And so I used the dimensions that they gave me for their rears and their fronts and what they did. Still no luck, I'm assuming? No problem. And I don't know what else to tell you because my video's not working, so it might be a short seminar. And if you have any questions.
Why don't you stand there and look at that? And just,
I can
just
do
know what
that
to say.
if you want.
Yeah, just know what to say.
Let me go back to the beginning. Let me try that again.
Could you put the camera on that screen?
I was going to do that, but he said they could not. That is the early stages of the rims. I'm probably not on film. So I used a solid piece of aluminum, and then knew the inside diameter and the outside diameters that I need. We talked earlier today about truing apart, and that only means you chuck it up, you machine the outside here, and you flip that, because now this is a true piece. And when you flip that and put it back in, then now you can machine off this end. And so you have to board, and I do a hole in the board, and then that's on the mill there, milling it out. And then that's indexing the holes from the backside, and then those are the rims. And there's the tire that we talked about. Those are the valve stems, very tiny. Machined again, and that's just 15 thousandths rod. These are the lug nuts. You do a lot of repetitive work when you need multiple pieces. And so I took rod and I put a 6-face facet on each end. That way I can get 2 lug nuts out of one piece. When you set your lathe up and you're cutting, you can set a stop on it so you can put your part in and cut it and then flip it and put the next one in. It makes it quicker that way. And so once you do the 6 facet, one of the things that Greg talked about is you can make your own tools. So I took a tool and cut a half circle in it. I can drive that into the part, and that will make the little cap that is on the covers that the guys use on their rigs. And then those are the little nuts. I made 62. I needed 60, but it's always good to make a few extra because you'll lose them and they'll drop off. That's the rear hogshead, and there's the stages. This is the one that got ruined, where you start and finish with a completed rim. And that's the front and the back side. There is it's probably hard to see from the back, but there's the resin slick. Those are the rings that I'm sliding on to create the width of the tire that I need for the rear. And that's actually at Mark's house. I recognize that gray. That is the front springer. You can replicate a lot of things in brass. You don't have to cast it or make it difficult, but if you take your kit part and break it down into shapes, there's really only two shapes in our world, round and square. And then the others are just a function of that. Half round is a circle with half of it missing. A triangle is a square with two sides folded in and the top gone. So when you look at things in shapes, it's easy to replicate in brass. And so I would just take flat brass and just start replicating the kit piece for the front hanger, because I knew that the model would have a lot of weight and more realism with the brass than with the plastic. Those are the leaf springs, just straight brass, and you just file and shape it. Those are the shackles that hold it. And there's the front axle. And what I did, instead of having to come down and mill those pieces out, I took a piece of brass in the center and shaped it. I took a top and bottom and would clamp it with hemostats and solder it. That gave me the top lip and the bottom lip. The internal pieces are two pieces of brass. It's half a circle and a straight line. Drop those in there, solder it. It looks like the kit piece. And less work than trying to mill that. Also on some of the pieces, since it is a real vehicle and they used real parts, there's a frame rails there. I went and photographed the real parts, one of which is the tank straps that hold the gas tanks. They're functioning, so I went to Peterbilt and just photographed theirs and then broke it down into parts and then just soldered it. And that's basically all I can tell you, unless you have questions.
Do you use a resistance solder when you solder?
I do. I use both. I use resistance. I use all three. I use an iron and I use a torch. Just depends on the application. And then I went and photographed the real trucks with the levelers and everything and just replicated that. Most of it won't be seen, but just so it's there in case you got judges are looking for it.
Hey Dave,
Yes, sir.
do you have any hints or tips if you're working with stainless? How to fasten it, how to...
I actually solder, you can solder stainless, the battery cover behind the cab, and the rear plate at the end, and there was something else. If you use silver solder, you can solder stainless.
It doesn't discolor.
There is a little bit of, it's not as shiny as the stainless. You can polish it.
And get it back?
Yes, or close. If you look close on the battery cover, the deck lid goes down, and the side, and I soldered it along that edge. And you can, if you look at it really close, you'll see it. Those are the gas tank straps. And so I just, I'm gonna go back. I think I had them laid out. Nope. That's them there. So once I made the radius on the strap, I went and machined the tank to match the radius on the strap, and then broke the straps down in pieces, kind of like they do at the factory. And so I solder brass together. If I need more than one piece, I'll solder 3 or 4 pieces, cut my shape, and then desolder it. And that gives you the pieces that you need. It's like photo etch, heat wave photo etch. And then once they're assembled, there's a little nut that tightens the band that constricts that'll tighten that around them. So I just put the tanks on there, stuck it through, and tightened the nut. And that's brass before I was chroming it, getting it ready. And I use the Caswell system, the guy out of New York. Works really well. And that's the IPMS fax machine in the background. And that's the working fifth wheel. And just replicate it. You go look at the real one, photograph it, and just replicate it in brass. I know it sounds simple, but it really is. And that's the front grill. And then shot out with my 38. And then and then that's mocked up. My wife will recognize that furniture in the background and say, "Hey, wait a minute, that was our kitchen table. When was that?" When you were out of town. Because I'll get in trouble if she's in town. And there's the headlights and the pieces associated with that. A lot of times, the one thing Mark taught me, when you're wanting to make something, break it down into many pieces as you can. That way, if you make a complicated part and it's all one piece and you've ruined it, you've ruined the time and everything to make it. So break it down into as many pieces as you can and then put them all together. And that was very helpful. The guy that did the airbrush work on the real vehicle, I called him. He's a 24-year-old kid at the time. And he did all my, sent him my pieces, and he did them for me. On the real truck, it's phenomenal. And you can look through my pictures. It looks three-dimensional, and it is not. He is very, very good at what he does. But he was willing to do the pieces for me. That's a dipstick and the shut-off valve. And that shut-off valve was the one I told you earlier I ruined, and it's now on the VW. Messed it up, but it's okay for the VW. That's the block. That's the kit block that I cast. I cast the rear axles, and that's about the only kit parts I used. Everything else is pretty much scratch built. And that's it there. So that's pretty much it. If you're not fully asleep yet, you will be. If you have any questions, I can answer them. Say that again.
It's a lot of work for a curbside.
It is a lot of work for a curbside.
Did somebody say curbside?
Curbside.
Oh,
So we're having a seminar at 4, right, on curbside.
Curbside.
Yeah.
On curbside.
Super secret.
So we're done.
Seminar.
Sweet.
Are you gonna see
No, sir. I'm not. I wouldn't even label myself a machinist.